Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you to all of you for welcoming me here to your conference. I'm blown away by the number of participants and the length that all of you have traveled to be here, and thanks to all of you young leaders that are here as well, too. You know, the best thing that we all can do is continue to learn throughout our careers, and I'm so glad to see all of you starting off your careers that way. You have a room full of very knowledgeable people that you can gain some experience from, learn some things that worked for others, maybe catch some shortfalls that others had, and have a few less tripping stones for you as you go through your career as well. I wanted to start off with a little bit, even though, as Jim mentioned, I had some past involvements in different things, but on my operation myself, I have more involvement with the U.S. Department of Agriculture than I do with my state Department of Agriculture. So whether you're in state or out of state, I just wanted to briefly kind of go over and give a quick explanation of what the State Department of Agriculture in South Dakota does and which functions we take care of for the state. It varies greatly across the country as each state has different things specific to them. And in fact, earlier this week I was hosting my counterparts from the Midwest. So we have a National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, and the Midwest region, I was the chair this year and I hosted, so basically the states from North Dakota down to Oklahoma and over to Ohio and Michigan, the state directors and secretaries of agriculture were here, and it kind of showed off some things that are unique to South Dakota. So first, I just want to tell you a little of the vision of the Department of Agriculture. We've spent a lot of time the last couple years really reassessing what our vision is and our mission. Our mission is to promote, protect, and preserve South Dakota agriculture for today and tomorrow, and I think that fits very well into what you are all doing in your careers and on your operations as well, as really looking to do what you can today, but also for those that will follow you. We operate in the basic core values of integrity, customer service, support, and stewardship, and we try to, the programs that we operate and function within the Department of Agriculture, we try to keep close to these core values of the department. We have, this just kind of shows the general org chart of the Department of Ag, and I know it's boxes and small print, so basically the horizontal part on the right-hand side just shows that we have 5 main divisions of the Department of Ag, and then we also have a lot of boards and commissions that are kind of under the umbrella, although they are autonomous in how they operate in South Dakota. So of those 5 divisions, our first division within the Department of Ag is agricultural development. And just like one would imagine, we work to promote the industry. We look to do constituent support, helping the ag industry we have and those people actively in ag production. And we work to advance business development, whether it be more processing. As in the Dakotas here, we're about as far away from export markets for our crop commodities as anywhere in the country, so we therefore have very poor basis levels, making our feedstocks the cheapest here as anywhere in the country, and so we're continuing to look for opportunities that make sense across the state to utilize those cheap commodities and add value here. We have financing programs, although limited, to assist folks get their operations up and going with the young and beginning farmer programs and things. And then also spend a lot of time working with local partners. South Dakota is a local control state as far as regulations of, as far as local zoning and those types of issues. So we try to do what we can to help inform and educate local producers or local decision makers about opportunities that local producers are looking at being involved in. A couple of those opportunities, one, we're really working on our dairy industry in South Dakota, and dairy production and dairy processing have to continue to go hand in hand to be successful, and we are in the process in the eastern side of the state of a couple of our cheese plants are making major expansions. A product there that I think fits in carinata is, and some of you may have heard of this oil seed. It's a very high oil content crop, similar to canola somewhat. But it does very well in arid conditions, and even last year a little bit north of Pierre, where there was a 1/4 inch of rain recorded during the growing season for carinata, they still had 20 bushel carinata production when everything else was brown in the area. So it does very well, and and we're kind of doing, and a lot of work has been done in conjunction with the SDSU, and they've really assisted in helping to do research on this product last year, and this year we've gone to field-size trials, and we're kind of trying to really define and see what type of an opportunity this may be, not only in production and rotations, soil health issues, but also to bring more processing to the state as well. So I'll go on to our next division is our Ag Services Division, which is typical to most states have some sort of an ag regulatory division, and these are some of the areas that we work to help regulate and manage throughout the state. One I wanted to note here a little bit, and it's one that all of us in agriculture know, is that margins are very tight, and no matter what type of ag production you are in right now. And we have a state mandatory financial mediation program that we manage and facilitate in the Department of Agriculture. So if a lender is going to take a financial action against a borrower in the amount of $50,000 or more, they have to offer the borrower, or the lender has to offer the borrower a mediation process to go through. And the red line on top is the number of, by year, the number of mediation requests that we have received in the department. And if you can see the numbers on the bottom, as the dates starting with 2006 going to 2017, we can all tell where commodity prices were along those lines, and obviously that trend with the huge spikes upward are of great concern for us. The bottom line is the number of sessions held. So as the borrower, you can either accept mediation, go through the process, or you can refuse it, but the lender has to offer it. But we know that the people and the operations behind that number are not the long-term, well-established operations, but they are the folks that have gotten into the industry in the last half a dozen years or so probably, and don't have the equity to sustain through challenging times. And we know that ultimately it comes down, the majority of that is young beginning producers, and that's of great concern to us. Our third division is Resource Conservation and Forestry. Resource conservation, it kind of speaks for itself. Water and soil quality issues and things, work with our local conservation districts. And forestry is obviously very important in the Black Hills, but across the country, across the state, with urban and rural forestry issues as well. So one issue that, depending on what state you're from, South Dakota or elsewhere, you may have known of this pesky little bug that we just found in South Dakota. Was identified on the eastern side, right in Sioux Falls. But it's one of those issues. They tell us it's not a matter of if you're going to get this problem, it's a matter of when. And the when came in 2018 for us in South Dakota. And the huge concern is once you have it, it isn't going to go away. You can individually treat trees, but in a lot of ag country and ag production and landowners, we have shelter belts and things. It isn't feasible. If you have a couple trees, decorative trees in your front yard, you can maybe treat your trees, but it's a different story for probably everyone in this room. And the big concern is it's a big concern to municipalities, with a third of our community street and park trees being ash trees, but also 40% of our windbreaks in South Dakota are made up of ash trees, as well as it being the second most common native species. Like I mentioned, conservation districts, we work with them to provide assistance and distribute grants across the state to do more conservation practices. Somewhat unique to South Dakota. Some other states have wildland fire division. A lot don't, but we do. We're our state's firefighters. Work with fire prevention, suppression. We do training across the state. Work with our local volunteer fire departments, so that when unfortunate instances, like we had the third largest fire in state history last December down in Custer State Park. We relied very heavily on our volunteer fire departments that have been trained over time by us on firefighting procedures to be able to come in and assist with us in that as well. Our fire season in South Dakota, for those of you that know our weather patterns in South Dakota, you could see the spike of the 2012 drought that we had in the state. And even those of us that farm on the eastern side of the state, we contributed a lot to that as well in 2011 and 12 to the number of fires reported in South Dakota. Our last division in our State Department of Agriculture is actually our State Fair division. It is a full division. We have our State Fair over Labor Day weekend, and we do the planning and management for that, but we also do hundreds of other events in this, at our state fairgrounds. We have kind of quite a storied background with our state fair. We've had some challenging times back a couple of decades or more ago about attendance, and we've really been doing very well lately. In fact, in 2017, we had an event on our fairground facilities 5 out of every 7 days during 2017. So a lot of things going on. And right now, we have the National Junior High Finals Rodeo is just starting in Huron, South Dakota. So we're very pleased to be able to host that event this year and next year. It's the second largest rodeo in the world. And we have contestants all the way from Australia and other countries that come and participate and compete in that event. So we're pretty proud of the activities that we host there. So, and then obviously we have within the Office of the Secretary a lot of the support services that you would expect from a department. So what I really want to spend a little bit of time on is I think very relevant to what you were all here for, and Jim kind of led in on this a little bit. We started a campaign within the Department of Ag this past year called Every Field, Every Time, and for all the younger folks on my staff that know a lot more about social media things, that's the hashtag on top there, Every Field, Every Time. And what we really wanted to do was incorporate a lot of things that are really true to our core values and things that we wanted to help promote, and that is in modern day production agriculture. And it doesn't matter if you're a row crop farmer by the majority of your acres like I am, or if you're a rangeland manager and a livestock owner. We need to do more, spend more time looking at each field, each piece of land we operate, and every time we operate it, not just manage everyone differently, but sometimes and most times we need to manage each piece of property differently from year to year. And so we've been working hard to incorporate some of that into our messaging, soil health issues. There's so much that can be done with that. And I remember early on in my 2-year tenure here with the Department of Ag that folks would come up to me and say, yeah, we know that it's challenging times in agriculture. All your input costs are very high. And I said, well, there's one cost that's at all-time historical lows right now. And it caused them to pause a little bit, and I said, and that's opportunity cost. You know, when I relate it to, you know, in my row crop operation and kind of how things have changed over the last, say, 5 to 7 years for me, is when corn was $7 a bushel and I was harvesting in the fall, I would pull out the approach after unloading the combine for the last time and I'm headed to the next field. I knew I made money in that field and I didn't give it another thought and I went on to the next field. Well, 2 years later when corn is $2.80 a bushel, as I'm pulling out there, I've got a pit in my stomach because I know with the yields that I had, I just lost money in that field. And I'm looking back as I'm leaving and driving down the road saying, where in that field did I really lose my butt that brought my average down so that I'm not making a net profit on that field? And what do I need to do different between now and planting season next year to change that? And like I said, over the last 5 to 7 years, I've tried to put that into action on my farm, and I've probably converted about 10% of my acres back into some sort of grass management program, whether it was something I just voluntarily did or whether I used a CRP or an EQIP program or something else. But I've looked at things, some things maybe should be permanently back into grass. And I have an area that 7 out of 10 years after I would plant it, I would get flooded out sometime, like this rain event we're having now. It's well underwater again. But there are years when I'd put $500 an acre investment in there and I'd get nothing back. And not only would I get nothing back, but my soil health is just going down and down because there's nothing growing in there all the time. And I thought, I've got to change some of this. I just can't keep doing the same thing on that same field all the time. I need to change. And sometimes it takes courage to do that. We were talking to a young producer in the way northwest part of South Dakota earlier this week, and she was telling about on their family operation, they have a lot of irrigated ground. And the tradition has been, since irrigation has been up in that area, that by God, if you have acres under irrigation, it has to be a cash crop on there. And she said, since I married into this family, we have never made a profit on a cash crop coming off those irrigation acres. So her and her husband changed, and now they're doing multi-species crops on there where they're grazing those acres, and everybody in the countryside, and they probably get scowled at church even on Sundays, but people thinking you're nuts. This is cash crop land and you're grazing that. And she said, but since we started grazing that, we're making money on those acres every year. So sometimes it's a little hard to think outside the box, to do things. I know as some of my neighbors have been looking to expand their, buy a little bigger planter and to do, bigger equipment to cover all those acres. I'm sure I've gotten some looks as well, as about 10% of my ground went into grass seedings as well too. And even this year I'm incorporating in some more. I was doing some math and figuring out that even in extreme southeastern South Dakota, where cash rent values are pretty high, and if you don't do a lot of calculations on it, you think you're forced into row crop only production. And I figured out that as long as it keeps raining, and it appears like this year it will for us over there, that I can get 4 different crops grown and grazed off of that same acre, and it'll actually be cheaper for me in land cost than it would be on the traditional pasture ground that I'm renting. And I know it's going to be better for that soil health versus just raising corn or beans on those acres. So my point is that there's a lot of things we can do out there. Sometimes it takes a little courage to think outside the box and get those raised furrows and from people who are looking at doing the same thing all the time. That when you're going upstream. But I think all of you, especially you youth here, that I think you look at things a little more from a pencil versus a tradition way, and I would encourage you to continue to do that throughout your careers and look for opportunities to do the right thing and to do different things every time that it's the right thing to do. So for those of you that are in South Dakota here, the Department of Agriculture hosts, or close by, every summer we host the Governor's Ag Summit. And this year it's going to be in Rapid City just this next month, in about 3 weeks away. And we'll have a variety of issues covered over a couple days, and some tours as well. So if you're in the area, we would definitely welcome you to come and participate in that event as well. So with that, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's great to see a large group of folks that really think in the same way that I do, and that's a bit outside the box. Look at opportunity costs when they come your way. And some conversation I had before this luncheon started, I thought as well that we were talking about different land management things and what you can do by looking at multi-species grazing and all these different things versus the way we've done it since we've settled these areas. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, just think of the carrying capacity that these plains have had, the way nature did it before man came and screwed it up, so to speak. So all the things that a person can look at about being a little more specific, treating every field differently every time you do utilize it, we can get back to larger carrying capacities and more profitability as well. And that means sustainability and more people being able to be afforded the quality of life that all of you enjoy. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the chance to come and visit, and have a great rest of the conference.